Hey guys, Coach Logan here again with our game of the week. This was Vrishank P versus Elliott from the Friday Rapid Tournament. And I'm actually going to pick this game up as we are in the endgame here. There was some interesting stuff at the start of it, but it's quite an interesting endgame, so I didn't want to waste time in the video. I wanted to just get to the good part. So Vrishank is playing white here, and Elliott is playing black. We've reached this bishop endgame where black has an advantage for a couple reasons. Primarily because their king is much more active. Black's king is already on c6. It's black's turn to move. And also white's pawn structure is a little bit worse than black's with this isolated e-pawn. But it's still a very interesting game, so let's see what happens. So Elliott played, Elliott played king to c5. So this is, I think, is the right idea, but not the most precise move. Basically, what he's trying to do is walk his king into white's territory here and start taking these pawns. However, I don't believe c5 or king c5 was the most accurate because white can actually do something here to slow black's advance. So if you want, you can try to pause your videos and figure out what white can play here, but white could actually play the move pawn to b3. And this would make it. This would at least slow black down considerably for the time being, as their king does not have an entry square. Therefore, I think it was more precise for black to play king b5, and the point is that this a3 pawn would now be hanging if white were to play b3. The bishop could come and take on a3, and black could continue to make progress. So black played king c5. So I believe white should have played pawn to b3 here. Instead, white played king f2. But I think it's worth looking at what would happen if he were to play bishop takes c7. If he were to do this, because it's a natural looking move, here we can really see demonstrated the difference between king activity in the endgame and an extra pawn. I'm always telling kids that I think that the single biggest mistake they're making in the endgame is not activating their king and or letting their opponent's king get too active. And this would be a crystal clear example. After king c4, let's say something like bishop b8, just trying to target all of black's pawns. After a move like a5, bishop c7 targeting the b pawn, black can defend it with bishop c5 check. And after something like king f1, now we would see king to b3. And basically all of white's pawns are going to, or enough of white's pawns are going to start falling here. He's just too slow to start defending them. Something like king e2. Black can take here on b2. They'll soon be able to take on a3. And then this a pawn is just going to be a monstrously dangerous passer. So it was a smart idea by Elliott trying to bring his king in. I do believe king b5 is more accurate. But anyways, we had king c5, king f2. So Vrishank is trying to activate his king, which makes some sense. King to c4. Now king to e2. King into b3. And now Vrishank takes this pawn on c7. So we're getting something similar, only Vrishank has his king on e2 instead of still stuck on g1. Takes on b2. Bishop to b8 there. And Elliott takes this pawn. I do think he could probably get away with playing something like a5, and then again, if something like bishop c7, he could take the time to play bishop c5 and then grab this pawn. In which case, I think his a pawn is significantly more dangerous than anything white can do. But so, anyways, after bishop b8, we had king takes c3. White grabs on a7 so that black loses his a pawn, but still black is much better here after bishop c5. Noted bishop c5 I think is still probably winning, but I believe more accurate would just be pawn to b5. Again, Elliott will soon be able to take this a pawn, and then his b pawn will be well positioned to just kind of crash through straight down the board. But we had bishop c5, king f3 from white, king to b3. King to f4. So Vrishank, I think, decides that he's not going to be able to win that, or he's not going to be able to save his a pawn. So what he's doing now is just getting maximum activity for his king, trying to go after black's kingside pawns. We see now king takes a3 from Elliott. So he has now this extra pass pawn here, this b pawn. White plays king f5, and here, once again, I think that black makes an inaccuracy that could potentially cost him the win. So I would say this would be a good time to pause your videos and think what you would play if you were playing black here. You're up a pawn. It's a pretty good extra pawn, very good extra pawn. But at the same time, white's king is getting kind of active on the king side, and they might start taking some of these pawns soon. So pause your videos and think what you would play here as black. Okay, in the game, Elliott played a very natural move here, king to a4. And it makes a lot of sense. He's just getting back to, I guess, support this pawn, and but also not block it. However, the problem with king a4 is it does not defend this bishop on c5. And so basically, I think it is extremely important to get this b pawn running. If given enough time, white will take enough of these pawns on the king side that they're extra pawns over here, well, right now they don't have extra pawns, but if they start taking your pawns, then they will. Then those could create counterplay and make it hard for us to win. So I think it's very important to get our b pawn running. In order to do that, we need to be able to push it without hanging this bishop on c5. So black should play the move king to b4 here. After something like, let's say white would continue similar to what happens in the game with king e6. Now black could play b5 comfortably. White should probably avoid the bishop trade because that'll just be a simplified ending. But again, even after something like bishop b8, and now say we move the king somewhere, this pawn is going to become very dangerous very fast. I think this was the most accurate way to continue. Instead, we had king a4, where the bishop is still hanging. So we see king e6. The pawn can't push just yet. So we see king a5. But notice this is going to take a lot longer to get this pawn going now. King f7. We get king a6 threatening the bishop. And then we see bishop to b8 from white. This is another good example. I guess it just flashed on the screen, so I won't ask you to pause the videos. But here, white has done actually a very admirable job getting his king active here. I'll give Vrishank a lot of credit. In a difficult position, he's found the best way to make problems for black. But here with bishop b8, I think he gives Elliott chances to win again. The best move here would be to just at this point say, okay, black, you have spent 3 tempi getting your king to a6. I've gotten my king to f7. I'm close enough to start taking these pawns. At the end of the day, this bishop probably isn't long for this earth anyway, so just give it for this pawn. Get rid of their big threat on the queen side, and after some sort of recapture, now after taking on g7, this should be sufficient to draw for white. For instance, if black were to play something like I don't know, let's say pawn to h5 here. Let's see here, pawn to h5. Then, actually, one more accurate move. What do you think white should play here after a move pawn to h5? Okay, keep your videos paused if you want more time. But I think the most accurate, actually, is to make sure that you can eliminate this pawn. So with the move pawn to h4, you fix it onto a light square. If you were to instead play king takes f6, there's a potentiality that this pawn goes to h4, and then it's a little bit tricky to remove. Still, this might just be a draw anyway, because this pawn is the wrong color to queen. If we think about like a king, bishop, and pawn endgame, if white's king is able to get in the corner here, it's going to be quite difficult for this pawn to queen. But still, I think I would get rid of, I think I would play h4 here, fixing this pawn on a light square. And now if something like bishop e5 to defend this, here we could play king g6 and then just grab this pawn. And then actually our outside passed h-pawn could cause problems for black. So, but regardless, I think the clearest way to equalize this game is to just take this pawn on b6. After bishop b8, black plays bishop e5, which I think is a good move. And after bishop c7 here, I think white finds himself in a little bit of trouble again. He probably, again, should have just taken this pawn. And it's worth noting that f5 check is not that great because pawn to e5, and once again, black might have some problems here. White's king is quite active, and if black tries to get too active with this pawn, white can also eventually he moves his king and then starts running this e-pawn here. Like if he gets out of this pin, this e-pawn is only 3 squares from queening as well. Instead, white played bishop c7. We see b5 from black, but here I think the most accurate move actually is bishop to e5. And the point is you are challenging this bishop here. If white were to trade, this is a winning endgame now for black because the b pawn will just run straight down the board, and white is too slow. After something like king takes g7, this pawn just goes. White still needs to clear a path for a passed pawn, but it's pretty clear that black is queening in time to, not only get his queen, but get back in time to stop white from doing the same. I guess it's a little bit, you have to have a little bit good technique here because white's pawn is close, but this is not the, this should be a win for black. Okay, so bishop e5 was the most accurate here. And then getting ready. This would also give black a chance. If white does not take the bishop, then black could also potentially, move this pawn on g7 to like g5 or something and hold it, and then run his b pawn, or maybe just run his b pawn. Actually, I think is better. All right. So if we go back here, we had bishop to b8, bishop to d4, bishop to c7. Okay, I would have played bishop e5 there, but then pawn to b5. We see now bishop to d6, king to a5, Vrishank takes on g7. Elliott played f5 check here, but I mean, to be fair to both players, this was a rapid game, so they probably didn't have that much time at this point. He probably, again, should have played bishop e5, just dislodging this bishop and, covering the e-pawn and just kind of holding down the fort on the king side. And then, again, white can't really take the time to take this because black is queening too quickly. However, after f5 check, white now gets to play e5 and has his own passed pawn, so it's getting very double-edged. Black plays b4. White plays bishop takes b4, sacrificing the bishop for the pawn, but I think at this time it's finally actually the wrong time to do that. White actually has sufficient counterplay with his own passed pawn on e5 that he might actually even have an advantage. So after something like king takes h7, if we see pawn to b3 now, white could now play e6, and if black were to continue, white is able to queen as well. So this, again, this would be, white would be up an extra pawn here, so this would be good for him. So we had e5, okay, bishop takes b4 check, which, yeah, I think he should have just taken on h7 and then run his e-pawn. So we see king takes b4, king takes h7, bishop takes on d4, on e5, and now we have this interesting conclusion where white is down a bishop, but black is down to one pawn, and if white is able to trade that off, it's going to be a draw. So we see some moves, and at this point, this should be a draw, although it gets a little bit dicey for white at another point. Elliott's bishop is keeping kind of an eye on this pawn. I think Vrishank is trying to promote and deflect this bishop. So Elliott is sort of like working his king over. Actually, at this point, a promotion should be just an immediate draw. I think Vrishank felt he had winning chances here, so he didn't immediately promote and take the draw. That actually could have gone very wrong for him at a moment coming up. So Elliott is just holding down the fort on h8 there. King e4, king h3, king f5, and here Vrishank plays king h2, which is actually a mistake. He needs to keep the black king from invading, so a move, for instance, like king h4 would keep this even. By playing king h2, he actually lets the black king get very dangerous, and again, we see the importance of king activity. So we see king to g4, king to g1, king to g3. This is all very good. And then king f1, and here Elliott misses his chance. Here he could have played, actually I'll say again, pause the videos if you want, but what he could have done here is play the move bishop to d4, which would now put white in Zugzwang. If white moves his king, we take on g2. If they promote, the bishop takes, and then white could now try to stay in the corner, but after something like bishop d4 check, king h1, black can eventually force white into Zugzwang again. Let's say I think he can triangulate the king here. He has something like bishop e5, and after after king to this is more accurate, king to f2. Now white would have to push the king up to h2, and then after f3 check, black is taking on g2 and winning. Okay, so that would have been the way to win. Instead, we had king h4, and now Vrishank was able to play king f2, king g5, and then after king f3, he was finally able to trade off this g-pawn and secure the draw. So a very interesting endgame. Clearly, I would have shown the whole game, but it would have been too long. So great job to both Elliott and Vrishank, and I will see you guys for next week's video.